To organize the 2022 World Cup, Qatar spent 15 times more money than previous hosts. Why? Also, why does Qatar spend tens of millions of dollars to recruit football legends like David Beckham or Zinedine Zidane to be their global ambassadors? And also, why do states with a bad track record in the respect of individual rights throw billions of dollars in buying prominent European football teams? Money that they might never see back. I'm Nikos, and with my colleague Agustina Vergara, we will answer these questions today in New Idea Live, the podcast of the Ayn Rand Institute. And our topic today is sport washing. Sport washing is the use of sports by institutions with some dirty track records in order to improve their reputation. So, Agustina, the term sport washing has become quite prominent lately due to the World Cup in Qatar. So, what is wrong with Qatar getting the World Cup, and why do so many people talk about sport washing?
So I think we need a little bit of context setting here to really understand why this happened, like why Qatar was awarded the World Cup when it was really unlikely that it would. So Qatar was awarded the World Cup, won the World Cup bid in 2010. So basically, in a nutshell, the process to award a country the bid to host the World Cup is basically people at FIFA vote, right? And they consider things such as, back then in 2010, it was basically the infrastructure of the country, and if they had the capacity to host the World Cup, and political stability and all those sort of things for safety and such. After 2010, allegedly, FIFA is now considering the human track record of the countries. I have questions whether that's true. But back in 2010, Qatar was awarded the bid won the bid to host the World Cup versus countries like the US, Australia, Japan, and South Korea. We, of course, know that the US eventually won the bid to host the next World Cup. But at that point, Qatar won against the US, particularly for 14 votes against 8 that the US got.
And it was the same day, if I remember well, that Russia also won the bid for the 2018 World Cup. So FIFA said, we have all these options. We're going to pick Russia 2018, Qatar 2022.
Yes, exactly. It was at the same time that Russia was awarded the bid for the World Cup that we saw in 2018. And the U.S. Department of Justice and many other people and institutions claim that there were bribes that were accepted by top officials of FIFA as part of the voting process to elect both Russia and Qatar as the tournament host for 2018 and the 2022 World Cup. It's not me saying it. It's a little bit of speculation, but it's the U.S. Department of Justice that is saying this in the context of an investigation that it has been carrying on for years about corruption in sports. So even though the infrastructure was lacking, and there were a lot of concerns about that back in 2010, Qatar was awarded the bid, and the infrastructure. So Qatar started building a lot of infrastructure that was part of the deal, part of the promise. So Qatar built 7 new stadiums with a capacity to host, obviously, thousands and thousands of people, which were extremely expensive, and they're state of the art and everything. We've seen them in the broadcast of the World Cup. It built a lot of hotels, completely redid freeways, built new freeways and everything, and just the general infrastructure of Qatar completely changed for the World Cup and to be able to host the World Cup. Now, how much did they spend, Nikos? Like, I think you know that information. It's a crazy and insane amount of money.
It's an insane amount of money. So rumors say that they spent more than 200 billion with a B dollars. Now, how much is that compared to previous tournaments? Let's put it this way. All the World Cups that I've watched in my life, the first World Cup was Italy 1990. I'm that old. But even all the World Cups that has taken place during my lifetime, if we all put them together, they still don't make up for the money that Qatar has spent for its World Cup. And notice something else. Qatar was not a poor country, because it would make sense to say, look, a country wants to develop, so they need to build roads, hotels. Qatar was already a very rich country. So this money is absolutely mind-blowing. More than $200 billion. So to put it into perspective, Russia in 2018 spent only $16 billion, and Brazil in 2014 spent less than $20 billion. But this is not the only way in which Qatar has thrown a lot of money in football. Qatar has paid David Beckham, the football legend, allegedly $12 million per year for Qatar to be an ambassador of Qatar, basically to tell people Qatar is beautiful, visit and invest. And the question is Qatar going to somehow get this money back? My guess is probably no. So what they're after here is not financial returns. It's not that we are throwing a lot of money in, but we expect a lot of money out. You said that Qatar built 8 football stadiums. Well, Qatar is very small football market. It's a small country to begin with, but also it's a very small football market. But this is not the only way that Qatar has been involved in football. Some years ago, a fund from Qatar, which is basically controlled by the Qatari government, bought the football club Paris Saint-Germain. Since then, they have brought to Paris Saint-Germain football legends like Buffon, Ibrahimovic, later Neymar, and in the last years, Mbappe and Messi. So for those of you who know football, the 3 strikers of Paris Saint-Germain are Messi, Neymar, and Mbappe. This required tons of money, from tons of Qatari money. And this, you need to understand, it's at the end of the day government money. And they haven't even won the Champions League yet. So again, this is not that they're doing a clever financial investment. But it doesn't stop there, because other players have also joined in this new thing where funds from Gulf states countries buy teams. Manchester City is effectively owned by the state of Abu Dhabi. Again, it's a fund, but everyone knows that behind this fund is the government. And they have spent billions in Manchester City. And lately, Saudi Arabia also entered the field, and they bought Newcastle United, one of the most historic and popular and prominent teams in the UK. And the question again is, why are they doing this? Do they expect monetary gains? Well, let's see what happened in the case of Abramovich. Roman Abramovich famously bought Chelsea in 2004. Of all the years that Abramovich held Chelsea, it only returned profit 3 or 4 seasons. So, Agustina, if it's not for money that they're making this huge investment, if they're throwing this money to what is often a bottomless pit, why would they be doing this?
So the reason that Qatar and other authoritarian regimes engage in this practice of what is called sportswashing is essentially to cover up for their many human rights and individual rights violations. So in the case of Qatar in particularly, we have like what everybody's talking about when it comes to the World Cup, and one of the reasons why so many people are boycotting the World Cup, which is the migrant worker deaths. So in a nutshell, like we said, there was like this complete overhaul of infrastructure in Qatar and building hotels and stadiums and freeways and all of that, and that obviously required a lot of workers. And Qatar received migrant workers from countries like India, Bangladesh, etc., to do this. And what happened was that a lot of, like, since 2010, which is when all this work started, a lot of workers, like an insane amount of workers, have died on the job. So, but there is a lack of transparency here because the Qatari government says that only 37 people died from 2010 till today, basically. But human rights organizations and independent researchers say that the deaths are of at least 6,500 workers. And the deaths are being classified officially by the government as, heart failure, or, this person died of natural causes, which has been proven to not be the case for an overwhelming majority of the people, usually men, who have died. So we're talking about overall healthy men, like mostly young people, that have like completely collapsed on the job, like one after the other, essentially, with no apparent reason. But the reason is, according to the Qatar government, they'll say, well, it's natural causes. Well, it's really not, because they worked in terrible conditions, in the poorest conditions possible. Essentially, they were close to slaves for some of them. Some reports say that they were forced to work 12, 16 hours a day, and year round. So Qatar in the summer is an extremely hot country. That's the reason why the World Cup is being held now, as opposed to being held usually in June or July, when it usually happens. And a lot of people also committed suicide because it is speculated, because of the terrible work conditions, and because their passports were being confiscated as well, so they couldn't really leave, go back to their home countries, go see their families, because they had no chance. They had to stay there. So
that's very important what you said, Agustina, about the passports, because people throw these days the term slavery around very easily. They talk about modern slavery. But in this case, we have, as you said, something which is not miles away, because you have people who are, it's very difficult for them to leave. It's very difficult for them to return to Philippines or to the country where they come from. Why? Because their passports are confiscated, or because they have deals that says that if you leave early, you don't get money, or that we have withholding of salaries. So we even saw things like workers turning against each other in violent outbursts with the hope that they would be deported. This means that these people couldn't leave. This means that it's not the situation where you have a quote sweatshop where the conditions are bad, but it's an improvement from what used to be there in the country. And the most important thing is the worker can say, I don't like it here, I leave. So you're right to make this point that these people not only worked in horrible conditions, but they were not free to leave, or they were not free to say, okay, I'm done today, I'm going home.
Exactly. And the Qatari government has done next to nothing to fix this situation, and it has lied about the number of deaths and the causes of deaths. Technically, they introduced some labor law reform or something like that. Nothing really changed. It's still, the problem persisted, and they didn't care basically at all. So that is the migrant worker crisis that a lot of people are talking about. But there are like many other issues that are going on in Qatar, like aside from this context of building this infrastructure for the World Cup, etc. So I'm going to try to be brief here. This is a topic that really gets me really angry. But so under Qatar's guardianship system, which is similar to the guardianship system that we see in many Muslim countries, women have no agency to make their own life decisions, right? So basically, the guardianship system mandates that women need the permission of a male relative to basically do anything of relevance or importance for their lives. So women cannot pursue a career without the permission. They cannot pursue certain jobs without a permission from a male relative. They cannot marry. They cannot travel without permission. And if they are not married, it's almost impossible for a woman to access some of the most basic reproductive care, such as prenatal care or ultrasounds that are just routine for most women elsewhere in the world. Also, extramarital sex can be punished with up to 7 years in prison, lashings, and even sometimes the death penalty as well. But everything about this, I think, is extremely outrageous. But the fact that women do not have access to the most basic reproductive care, to me, is just something that really, I find it extremely, extremely outrageous. So, for instance, I was reading a report from a human rights organization from this 20-year-old woman that she said when she was 18, she had to lie that she was married and gave a friend's phone number to the people at the hospital to pretend that, okay, this is my husband, call him and ask him for permission. She was trying to obtain healthcare that it didn't even relate to sexual activity. It just, she had a problem, like low abdominal pain, and she was trying to access healthcare, but they would not even perform a physical examination on her if she didn't say that she was married. So she needed, she is not a, she didn't have any right. She was like, she was not a person unless she had a permission for her husband to be one. Another woman, and actually a British citizen that ended up living in Qatar, suffered from endometriosis since she was 13. But she could not get it diagnosed in Qatar until a few years after getting married, because she said that healthcare workers would not allow her to undergo certain examinations, including something as basic as an ultrasound or a womb biopsy, without a marriage certificate. So she was in horrible pain. Endometriosis is a very painful condition, and she was not able to get it taken care of for years until she actually got married. So I know a lot of people don't know this, but the people have to know that this is happening in Qatar, and this is one of the many things that the Qatari government is trying to cover up by, hosting the World Cup and being seen, as like, oh, this great country that is friendly and it's just like the Western countries, etc. But there's more. Yeah, go ahead.
One thing here, that this information is not that it required some deep investigative journalism. So if you think the conclave of FIFA, where they had to decide in 2010 who gets the World Cup, this was information that you could find almost with Googling. What kind of society is Qatar? How are LGBT people treated in Qatar? How are women treated in Qatar? You could find this very easily, because you could say, okay, these people are not political, they don't know, whatever. This is not information which is difficult to find. So let's make something clear. They gave the World Cup to Qatar knowing perfectly well what type of society Qatar is. So we know these things because some journalists are brave and they spoke up. But at the same time, these are things that were common secret in a society like the Qatari society. But it's not only with women. It's not only women who face a difficult life in Qatar. So what else do we have in terms of that regime?
Yeah, so part of, I think, secondary to the migrant worker crisis, I think people have been talking about the treatment of LGBT people in Qatar. And we saw, in fact, an American journalist being detained because he was wearing, I forget if it was a T-shirt or a flag, trying to enter a stadium with a gay flag. And he was detained for a few hours because of that. But that is nothing compared to what actually goes on in Qatar with the Qatari citizens. So in a nutshell, again, there's a lot going on, but we need a completely separate podcast to just talk about this. Same-sex relations in Qatar are punished with several years in jail, and for some cases of gay Muslims, even the death penalty. Granted, from my research, the death penalty has never been actually applied. It hasn't actually happened. But there have been many reports of police brutality against gay people and trans people and bisexual people while in detention. According to some human rights organizations, for instance, trans people go through a lot of harassment by what is called the preventive security forces, which, to my understanding, is something somewhat similar to a morality police that we've heard a lot about in Muslim countries.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the treatment includes arbitrary arrest and detention at, clandestine facilities, obviously in Doha. And they have experienced severe and repeated beatings and sexual harassment. And they actually put them through actual torture by kicking them in the stomach, kicking them in the head. There are actual reports from actual people that have gone through this, that have spoke up.
And you said that this law has not been actually put into action, but the law exists. And here's what I find fascinatingly, in a bad way, hypocritical. We live in times where a football player, in countries like the United Kingdom, they can have their career put in significant risk if they say something that might be considered homophobic. And at the same time, again, the powers that be in football give the World Cup to Qatar, which has in its legislation the things that you just said. Again, these are not secrets that somehow someone did a lot of spied into the interior ministry and they found these things out. These are things that are open to anyone. So again, when where FIFA gave the World Cup to Qatar, they knew about this legislation because they could find it very, very easily. Qatar is not hiding it. Qatar is not saying to the outside world, oh, we care about LGBT rights, but inside they do bad things. They're open about how they view gay people.
Yeah, exactly. But Qatar says the emir has said that this is a World Cup for everyone or for all or something like that, trying to pretend that he was including gay people, but at the same time, because he was asked that question, what are gay fans can they go? Can they attend the games? Are they safe? He was like, well, this is a World Cup for all. But at the same time, he was like, well, don't try to be smart here. Don't try to be, just respect our traditions or whatever. But it's not a World Cup for all. Like, this stuff is happening as the games are going on, and gay people that are being detained are released, and they're being beaten and tortured and being forced to watch other people being tortured, by the way. This is like one of the conditions for release, for instance, is that they go through conversion therapy. For those who don't know, conversion therapy has been discredited by science. It's incredibly harmful to a human being to go through that, but that is one of the things they have to do. They're put in solitary confinement. They do not have access to legal representation. It is just completely outrageous what goes on in Qatar with gay people. So, and the fact that they say this is a World Cup for all, well, not for your citizens apparently. And I bet if someone tried to be, quote, smart in Qatar and try to violate these regulations, they would get in a ton of trouble.
Yeah, it's this absolutely hypocritical thing which says we have no problem if you're gay and you come to Qatar. Just don't tell anyone you're gay and don't, quote, act you're like, don't hug, don't kiss. Although to be very fair, this society actually, as you said earlier, also punishes public displays of affection even to heterosexuals if they're not official married. Although this is not to say that the treatment of heterosexuals and gays are the same in Qatar. The treatment of gays is much worse. And again, these things are in the open, which makes so inexcusable what FIFA did. But there are more things. We could also discuss things about potential alleged links with various institutions in Qatar funding terrorist groups or supporting groups like Hamas. And again, they would say, no, we're just have some cultural institutions that give money for humanitarian reasons. Actually, a football official in the country was linked to Al-Qaeda operations. So if we go back, and when I say we go back, I don't mean go back to the 70s. There were investigations about these things in Qatar in the last decade. So again, FIFA knew all these things, and they decided to give the World Cup to Qatar. So what a shame and what an embarrassment. And also, not to mention that it's a society which officially hasn't got free speech. There are censorship laws, which in my book by itself should... so each one of these things by itself should discredit Qatar. Everyone's talking about the violation of workers' rights, which is super important, but there are all these other things. And these things are accumulative, and everyone knew. Now, let me ask you something else. We're going to discuss a bit about sports washing. And this is not and again, sport washing, you also have, I know you've found the definition and you'll tell us what sport washing is. It's not the first time that an authoritarian regime is using sports to whitewash its image. And an argument says that, well, you know what? Sports brings us all together. Sports brings out the best of us. So maybe now Qatar will change. So Agustina, tell us a bit more what is sports washing, and then let's go back to history and check this claim. Have horrible regimes actually changed when they got some big tournaments and when the world tells them, okay, now the spotlight is on you, be your best self, and let's hope you're going to change. So let's see what happened in previous occasions.
Yeah, so sports washing, like you said earlier in the intro, Nikos, is the practice of a controversial company, sometimes, or a country, in this case, using sports sponsorship or hosting sporting events to improve its reputation. This is according to one of the dictionaries that I consulted. And of course, it's not just to improve its reputation, but to cover for a lot of the crimes and things that are going on. And we'll talk a little bit later about how this can backfire, but it's a separate story. But so you were asking about what other examples are there? Well, throughout history there are many, but just in the last few years, we have the 2018 Sochi Olympics, Russia. Russia was right now we are all like aware of the authoritarian character of Russia because of the invasion of the Ukraine and the continuation of the war and how it has escalated. But Russia was an extremely authoritarian regime way before then, right? We are now we see it in the media, but it has been happening for decades. And so we have the 2014 Sochi Olympics. We have like we discussed earlier, the 2018 World Cup that was held in Russia. We have the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics, and this is in the context of this just happened this winter, right? And this is in the context of China sending Uyghur Muslims to detention camps, right, and torturing and killing them in that way. And one
here's
detail
an example of sports washing in action, so that our audience really gets it. So China, as you said, had the Winter Olympics, and they had an Uyghur athlete lighting the cauldron. You know how they have the torch, and you light the cauldron where the fire burns throughout the duration of the Olympic Games. So what was the message? You see, there's no problem with the Uyghurs here. We respect them so much that they light the torch. This is sports. This is exactly what sports washing is. It comes from the term like whitewashing. So again, China saying, "Look, what problem here? You have an Uyghur lighting the cauldron." So it's in front of our eyes. Again, the idea that the regimes use sports washing is not a theory that we came up with. We see it happening, and it has happened many more times in the past. But I interrupted your historical overview of sport watching. So back to you.
No, and then of course, well, in China, this issue with this outrageous thing that is going on with Muslims in China, it's sort of new in a sense. It's really not, but it's more recent. But China has been an authoritarian regime for a very, very, very long time. There is no free speech in Russia, in Russia, not in Russia either, but in China to a much worse degree. There is constant oppression. We're seeing, of course, the lockdowns and everything now, but that is obviously what the Chinese government would do. Like that is on the nature of the Communist Party. I have written about free speech in China and what goes on. It's unbelievable almost, but it's actually what happens. You can look it up the audience can look it up in New Ideal Live in the New Ideal website. And still, China was hosting the 2022 Winter Olympics and associating itself with some of the best athletes in the world and all the virtues of sports. And then we have also something that has made headlines, which is the state-sponsored golf tournament in Saudi Arabia. Of course, what is Saudi Arabia trying to cover here? Well, it's brutal oppression of women. It's even worse than it is in Qatar. And I have also written about this topic. You can look it up in New Ideal as well. And of course, it was on after the international outcry of for the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi, right? So
yeah,
this is just within the last few years, right? Like less than 10 years. I started like this account less than 10 years ago. So this is a practice. Qatar is not innovating here, in like did not discover, oh my God, we can just launder a reputation by hosting the World Cup. No, this is something that has been going on for many, many decades, and it seems to be pretty effective.
And the usual example that comes to mind to many people is when they discuss sports washing was the 1936 Olympics in Hitler's Germany. But I want to focus a bit more on another example because in my estimation, it's the most despicable, the most disgusting, the most horrendous. And this is the World Cup that took place in 1978 in Argentina. And you'll tell us more because you know more about the country. So we are a couple of years in the dictatorship of Videla, and this is one of the most brutal dictatorships that one could imagine. Torture, disappearance of people. But I want to focus on one thing before you tell us more about Videla. And this is how sports washing really is not a conspiracy theory or a fringe idea or something. So what does Videla do when he comes into power? Argentina had already taken the World Cup in the pre-Videla days. So Videla says, okay, in 2 years there's a World Cup. Here's a good opportunity. Because there was already a movement to boycott the World Cup. Because the horrendous things that Videla does were open to the public. So Videla, known to the whole world. So Videla went and hired a public relation group called Barson Marsteller on $1 million deal. So there were a lot of money. So Videla says, take this money, go out to the world and persuade them we're not as bad as they say we are. So again, conscious effort to say we will use this tournament to tell the world a different story from the sounds, the screamings of the people who are tortured. So tell us a bit more then about the 1978 World Cup in Argentina.
Yeah, you gave some context. I know about this and I've studied it. For the audience doesn't know, I'm from Argentina, and this is a topic though very much an open wound. So 1976, there's a military coup. 1978, the World Cup happens. Granted, like you said, Nikos, the World Cup was already kind of like scheduled before the military coup happened. But like you said, the military government saw it as a big opportunity to basically launder the image. Why? Because in Europe, the political refugees, the people that were able to escape Argentina because they were going to be killed by the military government here, were already talking about it a lot, and it was leaking to the press. We're talking about the 70s, right? There's no social media. There's no really like super fast way to communicate like we do nowadays, right? Like we have nowadays. So the government saw this as an opportunity to launder the image, and it spent, like Qatar, like an insane amount of money. So officially, so what the government said it spent was about $100 million. We're talking again in the 70s that it was much more money than it is today. But researchers and experts suggest that it actually costed around $700 million. Again, hard to tell because the entity that was in charge of organizing the World Cup was never really presented a report of the expenses. But the goal here was to cover all these human rights, like horrific, like when you said it was one of the worst dictatorships like in Latin America, it really, really was horrific human rights violations that for not just political opponents that were tortured, there was forced disappearance, and that were killed in the most gruesome ways, but also people that did not adapt to the morality that the government wanted Argentinians to have. For instance, gay people. My mom has a friend that was gay and was disappeared, never to be seen again because he was gay. He had no involvement in politics, no nothing. So just we could talk forever about this topic, but just to give a little context of how brutal it was. So these tortures, these killings were happening 700 meters from El Monumental, which was one of the main stadiums in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, where the World Cup was happening. And I believe, I am not 100% certain of this, but I do believe that it was where the final happened and where Argentina won. So 700 meters, which is, I don't know, I'm not good with the American
It's
system, but
walking distance. It's walking
it's
distance. The
walking
people who were
distance,
tortured to
exactly.
listen the sound of from the field.
And during that time, during the time of the World Cup, it's estimated that at least 50 people were victims of forced disappearance during this time, including 9 pregnant women. And one of the most gruesome facts about this is when Argentina wins the World Cup against Holland, during the celebration, so everyone goes out to celebrate the win and everything. It's like football is huge in Argentina, so like everyone is out celebrating. The military, the torturers took people that were at ESMA, at this detention center. It was one of the biggest ones in Buenos Aires. Took the detainees out for a car ride to show them that nobody cared that they were missing. And they told them, you can scream, you can open the windows and you can scream that you have been kidnapped or whatever. Nobody will care. And like to show you like that is exactly what they want to show. Like, look, we have succeeded in making this event a success. We have won the World Cup. This is a win for the military government, for the authoritarian government. Nobody cares about the detainees. Nobody cares about the disappearances. We have won. So it's something that it's such an example of sports washing, and okay, I'll leave it there because I could talk about this for a long time. But Nikos, tell me if you want to add any details there.
It's the way you put it is it couldn't be put in a better way, and it's quite correct what you said. And also, who gives the trophy to the captain of Argentina, Passarella? The dictator himself, Videla himself, which is quite unusual. Usually, the president of FIFA Videla himself gives the trophy to Passarella. And to their credit, many Argentinian players, at least allegedly, they tried to avoid taking a photo with Videla. Why? Because they knew that Videla was using them to whitewash his horrendous regime. So here's my message in all. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, one thing about that. So a lot of players knew about this, and a lot of the international of the other teams knew about this. The Dutch team actually the Dutch press and the team actually were somehow very aware of this, and the Dutch press actually sometimes, instead of broadcasting the games, they broadcasted the march of the Madres de Plaza de Mayo in Plaza de Mayo in Argentina, which was like all the mothers of the people that were disappearance would take a few laps around the main public square in Argentina in front of the what would be the Casa Rosada, which would be the equivalent of the White House, and they would broadcast that instead of the games, the Dutch press. But it was really hard at that point to know what was really going on. So a lot of players, I think, around the world and in Argentina too, were not super aware of what was happening. It was really hard. Remember, like I said, this was a time when there was no social media. The communication was not as efficient and fast as it is now. And of course, there was a ton of censorship going on. And of course, speaking up against the military government would, like, literally without any doubt, would land you in detention, or you would be disappeared, or you would be killed. So that's a little bit of a context of what's going on there.
Yeah, perhaps again the darkest moment in the history of international football, and also what a contradiction of feelings by the fact that it was the first World Cup that Argentina wins, but the players themselves were a bit. They couldn't celebrate because they knew, or they couldn't celebrate as much as they wanted because they knew that that Videla would use. And actually, Menotti, who was the manager of Argentina, he was also someone who was against the regime. He was actually a leftist, but the regime didn't dare to touch him because of his popularity. But he knew, the manager of the team knew, and also the players knew. So here's what I want to say as we reach towards our conclusion. The argument that says, oh, they're going to become better is disproven time and again by history. Videla's Argentina, okay, not to mention Hitler's 1936 Germany, obviously didn't become better. Videla's Argentina didn't become better. China 2008, they get the Olympic Games, they don't become better. Actually, they become worse. Russia takes the Sochi Winter Games and the 2018 World Cup. Actually, it becomes more imperialistic. It becomes more violent. So this idea that, oh, they're going to be open to the world and we're going to throw them this attack of love and they're going to change, the answer is no. And how do we know? First, we know it because these people take their ideas seriously. They are serious thugs. It's not thugs because they're misunderstood. They're serious thugs and they wouldn't change. But also we've seen it in practice time and again. So this is the answer to the arguments that say, oh, we shouldn't, or we should, or what about this argument, Agustina, which says, oh, let's leave politics out of sports. Let's just enjoy the game. Why bring politics into it? Which is the usual trope of people who have something to hide, or of people who wouldn't want politics to enter the field. But what would be your answer to this quite popular argument? Leave politics out of sports.
Well, that's basically what the president of FIFA, Gianni Infantino, said in a letter that he sent to the teams, to the 32 teams in the World Cup, just right before the World Cup started. He says, like, basically, leave politics and morality out of the equation. Just focus on the football. End of story. And there's this quote by this historian called Gerardo Caetano, who was a former football player and is a historian, very famous historian. He says, I'm trying to translate it in my mind because it's in Spanish, but he says something like, those who think that sports have nothing to do with politics either don't know anything about sports or don't know anything about politics. And I think that is very accurate. And my answer to those people is, you cannot, because like morality, politics is one thing, but like Infantino is asking to throw morality out the window, essentially. And morality permeates everything. And it doesn't go out the window when a football match starts, right? So when you're trying to get morality out of things and moral judgment out of things, I think that is always a problem. And the fact that he called for this, it means that there is something that we would judge as morally reprehensible in the first place. That if we actually look at it, we will be like, okay, I cannot get on board with this, right? And what Infantino was trying to do is to prevent players from having some gestures which some players have, like in favor of gay people, like to raise awareness of the migrant worker crisis and all of that. But also, I like to say something else related to something you said earlier about, how these regimes do not become better. They do not become better, but because also their motivation is not to become better. They are not hosting the World Cup. Qatar is not hosting the World Cup to be like, I want to be like the US, I want to be like Australia, I want to be like France and the UK. No, their motivation is to launder their image and to obtain a new respectability from the rest of the world. How? By associating themselves with the teams of some of the freest countries in the world and all these popular athletes, not just, the ones that they're paying, right, to prop them up, but also they're not paying Messi, but Messi is in Qatar playing, right? And also they're
Paris Saint-Germain, so in a way they're paying Messi as well.
Right. Okay, that is true. But they're trying to link the regime with the genuinely admirable values that are represented by football and by sports in general. So they put up this facade for the fans, for the press, for international organizations, to cover up these appalling records that they have of violating individual rights and basically their lack of freedom. And they make so this happens only by the default, like the lack of, so it happens, it is vetted by FIFA, and it makes the better countries that actually play with Qatar and go to Qatar kind of like accomplices of this authoritarianism. But I think the main thing, institution to blame, is FIFA for doing this and in the way that we have discussed. But what Qatar needs is not, they don't want to become better. They just literally need the better countries, the better teams in the world to literally and figuratively, play ball with them, to be seen as their moral equal, which is something that happens not just in sports, but happens also, for instance, in the UN. I have written about that as well. But they need to be seen as moral equals. Look, I'm playing with the US. Look, the US came here. Look, Messi came here. How can it be bad? So
we're all friends here. We're all the same. We all like
exactly.
football. We all celebrate Messi. Nothing divides us. Oh, except that we have these torture chambers, or except that we fund terrorism, or except that we persecute the LGBT community. So, yeah.
Right. And I think that Infantino's, what he said is like really telling of what FIFA's stance is, which is disgusting and appalling. And that reminded me of one of my many favorite quotes by Ayn Rand, which says, to abstain from condemning a torture is to become an accessory to the torture and murder of its victims. So that is what FIFA is doing, and it's trying not condemning Qatar itself, like FIFA itself, but also trying to prevent others from doing so. And I think that is just horrible and outrageous.
Exactly. And one last thing that I want to say. Notice how the apologists of Qatar, like Infantino himself, they actually use a language that is quite familiar to the West, which is the language that says, well, who are we to judge? So Infantino's argument, which was also the argument of some other people, was, well, you in the West have done so much. So Infantino actually said, for the next 3,000 years or so, Europe cannot talk about human rights. And my reply would be, you bet we can. I haven't tortured anyone. I haven't killed anyone. I haven't oppressed anyone. So I am not my race or my continent. I, as Nikos, can tell you, you lead an institution where you should be ashamed of it because you gave the World Cup to Russia and then you gave the World Cup to Qatar. So they use this non-judgmentalist, relativist thing. Well, it's a different culture. Or many Qataris say, oh, you come here, you have to respect our culture. Why? Why should I respect your culture? Prove to me that your culture is worth of respect, and only then will I consider respecting me. But it's this non-judgmentalism which is also prominent in the West, that is mobilized by Qatar. Okay, let me say a big thank you here to our super chatters. A huge thank you to Marilyn. Thank you very much for your contribution. And you ask, why does the West appease countries like Qatar, China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Iran, etc.? By the way, Saudi Arabia wants to get the World Cup, I think, in 8 years. And also, I think they're making a bid together with Egypt and Greece. So let's hope we won't come back in 8 years, another new idea live about a Saudi Arabia World Cup. So why do they do this? Many of them are pragmatists. They have only the short term in mind. So they think, well, it's a good business opportunity. Football will expand, and they cannot see the future. Others don't care, but they're also short-sighted because they think, oh, this is an opportunity for a quick buck. Not realizing that what this does to your reputation as an institution, and what this does to what problems you might find down the way. Here we are in 2022, and we still discuss the absolute moral shame of the 1978 World Cup. So whoever back then thought, well, it's going to be forgotten, they were wrong. So I think, Marilyn, this is why the West appeases. So they don't understand that there are moral things at stake. Agustina, have you got any other way to put it?
No, I think that is correct, but there's this fear of the West to morally condemn and take a stance against these regimes that we see it all the time, and we don't see it just in the higher levels of politics, but we see it at universities and schools where it's like, oh well, it's their culture, we must resist multiculturalism and respect for quote diversity, even if the values that are being proposed are just really go against the values of freedom and what we know that humans need for to live a real human life. And yeah, and I'd also like to say something that I think, I'm from Argentina. It's such a big deal. Like sport, like football in particular, is such a big deal, such a big part of the culture. And I particularly am not like a super football fan at all, but my dad was, and I know a lot of people that are. And I think that it's so like if I were a super fan, I would be outraged that my beloved sport is being tarnished by this. Like I said in an article that I wrote, if Messi wins, if Argentina wins the World Cup and Messi raises the cup, I mean, it will be super cool, but also it's happening in a land where people are not allowed to love who they want and are tortured and disappear because of that fact. In a land that I, as a woman, would be treated as a second-class citizen. In a land that it's a safe haven for terrorists from Hamas and the Taliban, who obviously want to destroy the West and all the values of freedoms that we have. So I think
Oh,
that
sorry.
is
And the
that is
relationship with
really
Hamas is again, this is not alleged. Qataris openly say, well, we throw millions and millions to Gaza. Oh, we're just helping Palestinians. We're not helping Hamas. Sorry, continue.
no, and I think that that is something that I find really, if I were a bigger football fan, I find it already very offensive, but I would find it extremely offensive if I was like a big football fan and having my favorite sport be tarnished by all these things.
Yeah, and I want to send my solidarity to Argentina, as they're my favorites, to the team I would like to see winning, because the first World Cup game I ever watched in 1990 was the semi-final, Italy with Argentina, Caniggia scoring for Argentina. Anyway, so yes, football is, as a journalist says, football is the most beautiful secondary thing in life. And it's a shame that it's in the hands of these people who are absolutely, I don't know whether to call them amoral, because they don't even know, they don't even get morality, or immoral. I will say immoral, because at the end of the day, it's the same. But at least there was a lot of noise, there was a lot of people putting the spotlight on Qatar, and it doesn't come to footballers to solve this. I mean, imagine being a 20-year-old English player like Bellingham, and it falls on your shoulder to make a stand. No, this, as you said, the main responsibility here lies with FIFA, or it lies with everyone else who should have made the case back then when they got the World Cup, not 5 days before, putting the player on the spot. Will you going to boycott the biggest career challenge of your life? But anyway, that's all I had to say about the topic. Again, a huge thank you to the people who kept us company, the people who sent their super chats, and the people who participated in the YouTube chat. Unfortunately, we didn't have time to go through all the questions on YouTube. So, Agustina, parting words?
Yeah, thank you for the super chats also. And we have some resources that you may want to look at to learn more about the topic that we discussed today. One of them is the Ayn Lexicon entry on moral judgment, where you will see a lot of material on how to properly pronounce a moral judgment, which I think we should all do all the time. And also my column for the OC Register from last month on Qatar's hosting of the FIFA World Cup, which touches on many of the topics that we discussed here today. And next week we have another show. We'll be having Ilan Journo and Ben Bayer talking about why altruism is always ineffective. And
Well,
please
there's
send us your
a lot of
questions.
this.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, there's been a lot of discussion about effective altruism, so
Mhm.
that's what the topic refers to.
Yeah. And please send us your questions for future Q&A episodes that we host every once in a while, usually once a month, and we can answer all of your questions relating to objectivism and philosophy there. And of course, if you enjoy the podcast, please subscribe to the podcast in your favorite podcasting app and a YouTube channel, and please share and on Facebook as well if you enjoyed this episode. And please like, comment, and let us know what you think. And also, you can send us an email with suggestions for future topics or feedback that you may have to newideal@aynrand.org. And we read all of your emails and we reply to many of them. So with that said, thank you, Nikos, for this discussion. I hope
Thank you.
Argentina wins because you wanted to, and I think Messi deserves it.
It's for
But it's
Messi.
going to
Yeah,
be
it's
a
for
little,
Messi.
yeah, it's going to be a little bit, no, not a little bit, but a lot tarnished, unfortunately, thanks to FIFA and Qatar, if that happens. But well, thank you to the audience, and we'll see you next week.